My name is Maren Kessler. I'm 38 years old. On Christmas morning, 2025, at 9:04 a.m., I sat in Courtroom 2 of the Antrim County Courthouse in Bellaire, Michigan, wearing the only blazer I owned that's still buttoned, with a felt stocking folded inside my purse because I hadn't had the chance to fill it. My daughter's name was stitched across the cuff in green thread. Junie. 8 years old. She had been taken from my house 40 hours earlier under an emergency order signed by a judge who had never met either of us. Across the aisle, my ex-husband, Grant Vance, 42, sat with his ankle crossed over his knee like a man waiting on a boat delivery. He leaned toward me while the clerk was still stamping paperwork and said, quietly, so it wouldn't carry, mothers like you get visits, not children. Then he straightened his cuff and said, you can keep the house your grandmother pitted you with. I'm keeping the kid. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't turn my head. I opened my folder, uncapped my pen, wrote 9:04 a.m. in the left margin, and wrote down both sentences exactly as he said them. What Grant didn't know was that at 9:04 a.m. on Christmas morning, a sealed manila envelope was already sitting on the clerk's desk in the hallway outside, waiting for a bailiff to carry it 11 steps into that courtroom. He had 43 minutes left of being a respected man. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope, and what happened when Judge Delphine Rooker read the third page of it out loud, please take a second to like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from right now. I need to take you back, because none of this starts in a courtroom. It starts on Cherry Bend Road. I was raised at 818 Cherry Bend Road by my grandmother, Ottilie Ashworth. Everyone called her Tilly. My mother, Charla, left in September of 1994 with a man who sold above-ground pools, and she came back sometimes, the way weather comes back. My older sister Delia went with her. I stayed. That was the family math, and it was set before I could read. Delia was the one with potential. I was the one with responsibilities. When Charla visited, she brought Delia department store perfume and brought me a list of things I'd done wrong since August. I remember being 9 and hearing her tell Tilly, in our kitchen, with me standing right there holding a dish towel, that one's got a face like a complaint. Tilly's house smelled like wood smoke and cardamom bread and the menthol rub she put on her knuckles every night at 9. The floors sloped west. In January, the windows sweated and froze and sweated again, and she'd wedge folded newspaper in the sash and say the house was just breathing. She was not a warm woman in the way greeting cards mean warm. She was better than that. She was reliable. When I was 11, a teacher accused me of stealing a calculator. Tilly drove me to school in a truck with no heat, sat down across from that teacher, and laid out the receipt for the calculator she'd bought me at the Meijer in Traverse City, dated 3 weeks earlier, with the SKU circled in pen. In the truck afterward she said the sentence that ran my whole life without me knowing it. Write it down, Maren. Nobody remembers a woman's word. Paper remembers. She gave me a green fireproof lockbox for my 16th birthday. Everybody else got car keys. I got a box with a key on a shoelace, and she told me to keep every document I'd ever be asked to prove. I met Grant Vance in 2012, at the counter of his family's business, Vance Marine and Powersports on M88. He was 30, tan in February, and he remembered my name the second time I came in. His family owned 4 properties in the county and a pontoon dealership and a pew in the second row at St. Aloysius. Mine owned a sloped house and a wood stove. I want to be honest about something. I didn't get tricked into loving him. I loved him on purpose. He was the first person who ever looked at where I came from and said it didn't matter, and I was so hungry for that sentence that I never noticed he only said it when other people were listening. We married on July 12, 2014. At the rehearsal dinner the night before, his mother, Coralie Vance, 67, took my elbow by the coat rack, looked at my dress, and said, "Girls from Cherry Bend don't marry up, dear. They get borrowed." I laughed. I actually laughed, because I thought I was supposed to. Junie was born March 3, 2017, at 4:19 in the morning, 7 pounds 1 ounce, and for about 18 months I believed I had gotten out of my childhood alive. Then the accounting started. That's the only word for it. Grant put us on what he called one ledger. My paycheck from the dental office went into an account I could see but not move money out of. Every month he'd sit at the kitchen island with his laptop open and go line by line. $14 at a coffee shop in Elk Rapids. $31 at Target. He never yelled. That's what nobody understands about men like Grant. He never once raised his voice. He'd just tap the screen and say, "Explain this one to me like I'm an idiot." By 2020 I was asking permission to buy conditioner. He installed cameras. Started at the lake house, for insurance, then the driveway, then the kitchen, then a little white one in the hallway outside Junie's room. He could pull the feed up on his phone from the dealership. Once he called me at 2:40 in the afternoon and said, "You've been on that couch 26 minutes. Not angry. Amused. Like he'd caught a raccoon on a trail cam. He had a phrase he used when I pushed back. He'd tilt his head and say, "Are we doing the cherry bend thing right now? That's how you make a person stop talking. You don't threaten her. You just make her origin into an insult, and then you make her disagreement into her origin." The thing he didn't count on was Tilly. She died April 15, 2019, at 6:32 in the morning, in the front room, with the wood stove going. She left me the house at 818, Cherry Bend Road free and clear, and she left it to me alone, in a trust, with language her lawyer had insisted on. Grant's name could not attach to it. He was furious for a week and then went strangely quiet about it, and I remember thinking that was maturity. She also left me a habit. And that habit is the whole story. Because for 11 years, without ever once calling it evidence, I wrote things down. Not a diary. Nothing emotional. I wrote dates. I wrote dollar amounts. I kept every statement, every notarized form, every conference itinerary, every pay stub, in a green fireproof lockbox on the floor of the closet, under a bin of Christmas decorations, because that's what my grandmother taught me a woman does with her life. Grant never opened that box. He genuinely did not think there was anything in my life worth locking up. I left on August 9, 2022. Not dramatically. He'd gone to a boat show in Novi and I had a duffel bag packed for 3 weeks, and I put Junie in the car at 5:15 in the morning and drove 22 minutes to Cherry Bend Road and unlocked my grandmother's front door with a key I'd never taken off my ring. The divorce was final June 14, 2023. Joint legal custody, primary physical with me, alternating holidays, and $1,240 a month in support that arrived when he felt like being seen as a man who paid. Here's what the next 2.5 years actually looked like, because I think people expect it to look like liberation and it doesn't. It looks like work. I got a job as a medical billing coordinator at Northern Bay Family Medicine in Mansalona. Started at $47,300. By 2025 I was making $52,100 and I'd learned to read an insurance denial the way some people read tea leaves. I put in a new water heater myself off a YouTube video. I got the wood stove recertified. I sat in the parking lot at work on my lunch break and ate the same turkey sandwich for 2 years and put $14 a week into a savings account, and by that December it had $6,410 in it, which was the most money I had ever personally controlled in my life. And Junie was happy. That's the part one hold on to. She had a reading chair by the window and a jar of pine cones and a teacher, Mrs. Estella Conquo, 47, who wrote on her October report card, Junie narrates. Constantly. Beautifully. Do not discourage this. Grant remarried in June of 2025. Bryn Cassidy, 33, front desk and medical records at, and I want you to hear this, Northern Bay Family Medicine. My clinic. Different building, same network, same patient system. I remember the exact moment I understood something was wrong. It was September 14, 2025, at a soccer field in Kalkaska, and Bryn said to me, in a voice like syrup, "Grant told me about your anxiety stuff. That must be so hard." I had never told Grant I was in therapy. I started seeing Dr. Adiz Nwosu, a psychologist in Traverse City, in March of 2023, after the divorce, and I had told exactly 2 people. Neither of them was him. I said nothing. I drove home. And then I wrote it down. September 14, 2025, 11:20 a.m., B at C, referenced my medical history, unprompted. 3 months later, on December 23, 2025, at 4:52 in the afternoon, a deputy knocked on my door with an ex parte emergency order granting Grant Vance temporary sole custody of June Ashworth Vance, pending a hearing set for December 25 at 9 a.m., because a temporary order that removes a child requires a hearing inside 72 hours and Judge Rooker refused to let a child sit in limbo over a holiday. Junie was in her sock feet in the hallway when they took her. She said, "Mom, is it because of the stalking? Because we'd hung them the night before and she thought she'd done something." I said, "No, baby. You did everything right." Then the door closed and I stood in my grandmother's front room and I did not scream, and I did not cry, and I did not call him. I sat down at the kitchen table with the motion packet and I read it like a billing denial. It was 41 pages. It said I was unstable. It said I'd left Junie unsupervised. It said I had a documented psychiatric history that I had concealed from the court. And attached as Exhibit F was a one-page letter on Northern Bay letterhead, signed Adiz Nwosu, describing me as a patient presenting ongoing instability and impaired judgment regarding minor dependence. I read it 4 times. And then, because I have spent 9 years inside medical paperwork for a living, I found 3 things. 1. Dr. Nwosu is a clinical psychologist. Her credential is PhD. The letter said LMSW. 2. The letterhead listed the Cass Street address. Northern Bay moved off Cass Street in November of 2024. 3. The letter referenced a session dated December 11, 2025. On December 11, 2025, every Northern Bay location was closed for an ice storm. I know, because I'd worked from my kitchen table that day, and I had the timestamped remote access log in my own email. At 9:40 that night, December 23, I opened the closet, moved the bin of Christmas decorations, and lifted out a green fireproof lockbox that had been sitting on that floor since my grandmother died. If you've ever had someone rewrite your life on paper and hand it to a stranger in a robe, type "paper remembers" in the comments. I want to know we're not alone in this. I want to be clear that I did not have a plan that night. I had a filing cabinet in my chest and I started pulling drawers. The first thing I found was the HELOC. A home equity line of credit for $186,400 taken against our former marital property at 12 Sailmaker Court, dated October 19, 2021, bearing my signature. I was not in Antrim County on October 19, 2021. I was in Grand Rapids at a coding compliance seminar at the DeVos Place, and I had the registration confirmation, the hotel folio for $312.74, and a photo of my own name badge that I'd sent my coworker as a joke. In the box. Because paper remembers. The second thing I found was my grandmother's habit turned into arithmetic. Grant had missed or short paid support 18 times since 2023, and I had logged every deposit, to the dollar. The total shortfall was $21,840. At 7:10 the morning of December 24, I called Warren Tibbetts, 59, the HIPAA compliance officer for Northern Bay Family Medicine, at home, on Christmas Eve. I had never spoken to him before. I told him I was an employee and a patient, that a document on our letterhead had been filed in a custody case, that I believed it was fabricated, and that I believed my chart had been accessed by someone with no treatment relationship to me. There was a pause on that line I will remember until I die. Then Warren said, "Don't call anyone else. Don't email anyone. I'm going into the office." He called me back at 1:15 p.m. His voice had changed. Between September 8 and December 19, 2025, my medical record had been opened 46 times under a single credential. B. Cassidy. Not once during a scheduled appointment. Not once by a provider. On my care team. Twice at 11:40 at night. Once, on December 11, the day the clinic was closed for ICE, from a remote login that resolved to the residential IP address at 12 Sailmaker Court. Warren Tibbetts did what the law requires him to do. He notified the Health Systems General Counsel, the Office for Civil Rights, and, because a document appearing to originate from their organization had been filed as evidence in a court case, the Antrim County Prosecutor's Office. At 5:02 p.m. on Christmas Eve, a prosecutor's investigator named Yolanda Pruitt, 51, reached Dr. Adiz Nwosu, 54, at her sister's house in Southfield, and Dr. Nwosu signed a sworn affidavit stating that she had never written, seen, signed, or authorized the letter attached as Exhibit F, that she had never treated me on December 11th, and that she had never held an LMSW license in the state of Michigan. All of it went into an envelope. It was walked into the Antrim County Courthouse at 8:41 a.m. on Christmas morning by Investigator Pruitt, logged by the clerk, and set on the desk in the hall. I told my attorney, Lorna Pinkney, 52, at 6:40 that morning, in a Speedway parking lot, over a coffee neither of us drank. She listened for 9 minutes. Then she said, "Marin, don't say a single word in there unless I touch your arm." So I didn't. Courtroom 2 on Christmas morning had 11 people in it. Judge Delphine Rooker, 61, on the bench. Bailiff Ronald Pelkey, 58, by the door. Grant. His attorney, Bradford Keene, 55, a man with a reputation and a very good watch. Coralie Vance in the second row in a red coat, holding her purse on her lap like a hymnal. Bryn Cassidy beside her. The guardian ad litem, Nadine Fulmer, 49, appointed 9 days earlier. Mrs. Okonkwo, who had driven 40 minutes on Christmas morning because I'd asked her the night before if she'd be willing to say what she'd seen of my daughter. Lorna. Me. And a court reporter named Dennis who kept blowing on his hands. Grant went first, because emergency move-ins do. He was good. I want to give him that. He sat forward, he called the judge, Your Honor, like he meant it, and he talked about being a father who'd stayed silent too long. He said he'd hoped I'd get help. He said, I didn't want it to come to this, but Junie was starting to parent her mother. Keene offered Exhibit F, Judge Rooker put on her glasses. And Grant made his one mistake, which was that he couldn't stop being himself in a room where he thought he'd already won. He looked over at me, at my grandmother's blazer, at my hands folded on a folder, and he said it loud enough for the record. She was nothing when I found her, Your Honor. I just stopped propping her up. Lorna's hand landed on my forearm. I said nothing. At 10:47 a.m., there was a knock on the courtroom door. Ronnie Pelkey opened it, took a sealed manila envelope from the clerk, walked 11 steps, and handed it up to the bench. Judge Rooker looked mildly annoyed. She opened it with a letter opener shaped like a walleye that someone had clearly given her as a gift. She read page 1. She read page 2. On page 3 she stopped, and she took her glasses off, and the whole room changed temperature. Mr. Keene, she said. Approach. Then she said, Actually, no. Mr. Keene, remain seated. I'm going to read part of this into the record. She read Dr. Nwosu's affidavit. All of it. I have never written, signed, reviewed, or authorized the document filed in this matter. I have never held the credential attributed to me. I did not meet with Ms. Kessler on December 11, 2025. I have never had contact with Mr. Vance. Then she read the audit log summary. 46 accesses. The credential. The overnight timestamps. The IP address at 12, Sailmaker Court. Bryn Cassidy made a sound in the second row like a chair scraping. Bradford Keene stood up so fast his legal pad slid off the table. Your Honor, counsel had no knowledge, and Judge Rooker said, I'm sure that's true, Mr. Keene, and I'd advise you to say very little else. He asked to withdraw at 10:56 a.m. She granted it. Grant tried. He said, Your Honor, I received that letter from my wife, who works at the clinic, I assumed, and the judge said, You assumed a psychologist wrote you an unsolicited letter about a patient who is not your dependent, and you filed it under oath. Then Lorna stood and asked leave to submit 3 exhibits she had brought with her that morning, the HELEC for $186,400 with the notary journal entry beside my Grand Rapids hotel folio, The support ledger showing $21,840 in arrears, and Grant's own bank records showing $63,500 moved into an LLC called Salemaker Holdings, formed 11 days before he filed his emergency motion. That's when the room turned, one person at a time, and I want to name them, because it happened out loud. Nadine Falmer, the guardian ad litem, said, "Your Honor, I interviewed the child on December 19th. I want the record to reflect that she was coached. She used the phrase, impaired judgment. She's 8. Mrs. Okonkwo stood without being called and said, I have taught this child for 2 years. She is the best fed, best read, best loved kid in my room. If someone said otherwise, they lied." And Coralie Vance, Coralie, in the red coat, who told me at my own rehearsal dinner that girls like me get borrowed, stood up in the second row and said, "Grant, sit down and stop talking." He turned around and hissed at his own mother, "Don't you dare," and that was the crack. That was the mask coming off in front of a court reporter. The tan, tilted head, one-ledger charm went out of his face, and what was underneath was just a man who had never in his life been told no by a woman who outranked him. Coralie sat back down. She never looked at him again. Judge Rooker vacated the ex parte order at 11:19 a.m. She ordered Junie returned to me by 1 p.m. that day. She referred the matter to the prosecutor for potential charges of forgery, uttering and publishing a false document, and perjury, and she held Grant in contempt for submitting fabricated evidence, and she remanded him for 48 hours pending arraignment. Ronnie Pelkey walked over with his cuffs already out. Grant said, "This is a joke," and Pelkey said, "Hands behind you, sir," in the flat voice of a man who has said it 400 times. They took him out the side door on Christmas morning at 11:26 a.m., past his mother, past his wife, past me. He looked at me on the way by. I didn't look up. I wrote 11:26 in the margin. Here's what happened after. Bryn Cassidy was terminated by Northern Bay on December 29th. In April she pleaded to a federal misdemeanor for wrongful disclosure of protected health information, took 12 months probation, a $12,500 fine, and lost the ability to work anywhere near a patient chart for the rest of her life. She filed for divorce in February. Grant pleaded guilty in April 2026 to forgery, uttering and publishing, and 1 count of bank fraud related to the $186,400 he took against a house using my name. The federal piece cost him more than the state piece. He was sentenced May 21, 2026, to 28 months. Vance Marine and Powersports was sold in March to a dealer group out of Grand Rapids. The pew at St. Aloysius sat empty all spring. The bank settled the fraudulent Helic and I recovered $86,000 of what had been taken in my name. The arrears came through garnishment, $21,840, in 11 payments, every one of which I logged. On January 8, 2026, I was granted sole legal and sole physical custody of June Ashworth Kessler. She took my name in March. It was her idea. She said Kessler sounds like a person who fixes things. I still live at 818 Cherry Bend Road. The floors still slope west. In March I registered a business, Cherry Bend Billing Solutions, and I now have 4 small practices as clients and 1 part-time employee, and my own name on a certificate on the wall where my grandmother kept a calendar from the propane company. The unexpected part came on March 9th. A letter, handwritten, from Wren Vance, 16, Grant's niece. She wrote, "I heard what he called you. He says stuff like that to my mom too. I just wanted somebody to know I heard it, and I wrote it down." I sat on the porch and read that 4 times. 16 years old, and she'd already figured out the only thing that has ever protected women in my family. I've thought a lot about why he did it on Christmas. It wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was strategy. He believed that a holiday morning would make me hysterical, and that a hysterical woman is easy to describe. He needed me loud so the paper could be quiet. He got it exactly backwards. He thought the courtroom was a stage, and stages reward whoever performs best. But a courtroom isn't a stage. It's a filing cabinet with a person sitting on top of it. And nothing you can perform will ever beat something somebody wrote down at 9:04 in the morning, in the margin, with a shaking hand. That's what my grandmother gave me. Not the house. The habit. We got home that Christmas at 1:40 in the afternoon. The wood stove had gone out and the house was 51 degrees. Junie's stocking was still hanging on the nail where she'd left it, and the felt one with the crooked green M that Tilly stitched in 1988 was hanging beside it, and I got the fire going and I filled them both, badly, with whatever was in the cupboard, a candy cane, 2 clementines, a pair of socks, a pen. Junie asked me if the bad thing was over. I said the bad thing was over. Then I sat down on my grandmother's floor with my back against the warm stove, and I looked at those 2 stockings hanging on that wall in that house that no man's name could ever touch, and I thought, I did it. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the person nobody would believe until the paper spoke for you, share this video. Someone in your life might need to hear it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this.